Good afternoon. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Julia Zimmerman, and I serve as the Program Officer for Education, Leadership, and Engagement here at Community Progress. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C., and I encourage you to share your name and where you're signing in from in the chat. Community Progress webinars equip participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's webinar, we are joined by Libby Benton, Erica Faubourg, and Tarek Abdelazim. Libby Benton is the Senior Counsel to National Initiatives at the Center for Community Progress. Drawing on her decade of experience representing tenants and low-income homeowners, she brings expertise in the key legal systems that touch vacant and deteriorated properties and a strong perspective on how policies impact the people living in the communities we serve. Her work has included helping communities like Louisville, Kentucky, and Decatur, Illinois, craft more equitable housing and building code enforcement systems. Erica Faubourg is the Deputy City Solicitor for the City of Cincinnati Law Department, where she works closely with the city's policymakers and code enforcement departments to address vacant and deteriorated properties. She joined the Law Department's Quality of Life Division in 2015 to work alongside and eventually lead a team of talented and dedicated attorneys focusing on abating nuisance properties. As Deputy City Solicitor, she continues to provide guidance and advocacy on a variety of issues involving nuisance properties. Tarek Abdelazim is the Vice President of Technical Assistance at Community Progress. Drawing on his near decade of work in local government and another decade in community progress, he brings an authentic appreciation for the challenges that can stymie government reform and a unique ability to advocate and build confidence for change that helps those most in need. A national expert in his field, approachable mentor, and a creative thought partner, he has supported local leaders to drive meaningful reforms and model solutions in places like Albany, New York, Louisville, Kentucky, Toledo, Ohio, and High Point, North Carolina. Before turning it over to our speakers, I want to mention that we will allow time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please click the Stage tab on the right of your screen, select Chat, and type your question into the chat box. We will share presentation slides and a video recording of today's presentation in the week following. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send an email to Julia Zimmerman at jzimmerman@communityprogress.org. And with that, I will turn it over to Tarek.
Good afternoon, everybody. Julia, thank you. That was such a wonderful introduction. I'm very excited about today's presentation. This has been an initiative that almost a year in the making, and we're really excited that we've seen such incredible response from the national field. So before we jump into it, I just wanted to quickly give an overview of what you can expect today. I'm just going to do a brief welcome. We're going to have Libby come on and do the bulk of the presentation featuring our new publication. We are delighted to have Erica here from Cincinnati to share what some of this looks like in action on the ground. Then I'll come back and talk about a scholarship opportunity, and certainly we'll leave time for questions and answers. So I wanted to start with maybe a little provocative slide, but one to introduce this conversation. I think all of us know May 2020, we bore witness as a nation to a tragic and wholly unavoidable death of George Floyd. It really invited and demanded a deep reflection and reckoning with racism, how racism impacts us as individuals, how it impacts our relations with others, how it's embedded in our institutions, and how over decades through unjust policies, it has profoundly shaped our neighborhoods that thrive and those that struggle with decades of disinvestment and vacant and abandoned properties. It also invited a lot of courageous local practitioners to have a conversation and answer the question, what does it mean for local government to commit to and provide for the safety of all residents? And any honest and pragmatic reflection certainly led to the conclusion that our current approach to safety is not meeting the needs of all residents. And there have been some really wonderful reforms since then, recognizing that, instead of criminalizing population that is unhoused, let's work on keeping people safely housed. For those calls that maybe are about domestic violence or about an individual maybe experiencing a mental health episode, that sending licensed mental health professionals or social workers trained in de-escalation is probably better aligned to meet the safety needs of those circumstances. Same thing addressing addiction as a public health crisis, or recognizing that the data tells us that some of the most harmful and fatal incidents between people of color and officers happens at routine traffic stops, and some departments have actually moved to civilian traffic divisions. So there's been tremendous amount of innovation and piloting in the field of law enforcement. And what we're want to share today and challenge the field is that same critical evaluation is long overdue when it comes to code enforcement, particularly in neighborhoods that experience high levels of vacancy and disinvestment. I have worked 8 years in local government. I have a soft spot for code enforcement officers. They do tremendous work, but they do it in an incredibly restrictive legal environment that is often inflexible and unforgiving. They do it in a profoundly shortage of resources and capacity. And they do this work in a political climate that, seemingly enough, or oddly enough, the response to ineffective enforcement because of the systems and policies often results in calls for more aggressive enforcement, which wholly is misaligned to the needs. So we're going to challenge the field with this publication that it is time to shift to a traditional code enforcement approach to a strategic code compliance approach. We're going to share some of those limitations of our current approach, the framework of a new approach. And we're also then going to invite communities to apply for scholarships. So those who are willing to accept that challenge and want to be at the front edge of a lot of this piloting and innovation where there's already some great work happening, we'd be really excited to meet you there. So with that, I want to turn it over to Libby. She deserves a lot of credit for her work serving as the anchor in this project, and really through her thoughtful leadership brought the team to deliver this resource to the national field. So thank you, Libby, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tarek. I'm really excited to join you all and tell you a bit more about our report today and share it with you. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover, and then I'm going to dive into the content a bit before I turn it over to Erica, who's going to share a real-world example of what this shift from traditional code enforcement to more strategic code compliance can look like in practice. I'm also hoping to make this a little bit more interactive and engaging. So thank you all so much for putting in the chat where you're from. It's great to see folks from all across the country and partners that we've worked with. But keep those typing fingers ready, because I would love to hear some feedback from you throughout the presentation. And please feel free to put questions that come up in as well. We're going to save time at the end, but as it occurs to you, please feel free to put them in the chat. So what does our new publication cover? So first, it talks about, really drawing on what we've heard in our experiences working with cities across the country. What are the limitations of traditional code enforcement? Where is it falling short? And then we walk through what's a better approach. What does strategic code compliance look like, and how can cities get there? Then the publication really dives into what would a strategic code compliance approach look like for 3 types of common problem properties: vacant properties, rental housing, and owner-occupied properties. And the bulk of the publication really focuses on vacant properties because that's what we focus on at the Center for Community Progress. But we felt like when we're thinking about a comprehensive rethinking of code enforcement, it's really critical to talk about these other common types of problem properties if cities are really hoping to use code enforcement to improve the health and safety of their community and to reach their neighborhood stabilization goals. So I'll touch on those as well during today's presentation. But before I get started, this is the interactive portion. I'd really love to hear from you all. What are the goals of your city's code enforcement? What are you all hoping to achieve? and I think there's a little bit of a lag, so I'll wait for the comments to come in. But, is it neighborhood stabilization? Is it health and safety? Compliance. I'm seeing a lot of public safety and a lot of compliance. Reducing blight. 100% compliance. I like it. Aim for the sky. Safe and inviting community. Voluntary compliance. Environment. Safer neighborhoods. I love it. So as those are still rolling in, I'd also love to hear, switching to what are the barriers that are preventing your cities from getting there? What are some of the things that are standing in the way from 100% compliance, from using code enforcement to get healthy and safer neighborhoods, improving the quality of your neighborhoods? Is it funding, legal barriers, legal systems, revenue? That's what we hear a lot from cities across the country. Specific types of landlords, specific types of officials like magistrates, non-responsive owners. That's right. That really reflects a lot of, you can see we have a lot of common answers. And so people are facing a lot of, cities across the country are facing a lot of common barriers in this area. And one of the reasons why I like to start with this question is that, we want to be honest about what this new approach and about what this publication is offering. Given the state of our country's aging housing stock, what we are proposing isn't going to be a magic wand or solve all of these problems. It would cost billions of dollars to bring our country's properties up to code. But what we are hoping to show you is ways, based on what we've learned from communities across the country, ways cities can use their limited code enforcement resources more effectively, efficiently, and equitably. So using what you can have to reach those goals. And so diving in, building off of, I'm seeing a lot of the things I'm going to talk about in the chat. So, what are the limitations to a traditional code enforcement approach? And what do we mean by traditional code enforcement? So when we're talking about traditional code enforcement, we really mean a process that's focused, that tends to be reactive and focused on hearing about problems almost exclusively from complaints, and then using primarily or exclusively civil or criminal fines to try to get property owners to bring their properties into compliance. And so to kind of show what some of the limitations are, I have an example here with a property. This is an actual property, but the example's made up. So this is a property outside of Pittsburgh that was vacant for a long time. There'd been several break-ins and all the copper had been pulled out. But if we're thinking about what does traditional code enforcement look like for a property like this one, and where does it fall short? So if this was a property in your community, you usually hear about it from a complaint, maybe from a neighbor. So here's a neighbor calling in the complaint. And then cities usually you would usually go out and do an inspection and issue a citation. Maybe there'd be a warning first and then a citation. And for a property like this, is that usually going to result in the owner bringing it up to code? No. So then your city is going to be looking at taking further steps, filing a civil case, filing a criminal case, and that case is usually filed against an owner. And what we hear from across the country is that properties like this are often owned by out-of-state LLCs, owners that no one can get a hold of. And folks simply the mail comes back returned to sender, or folks do not show up at court. So the city might end up getting a default judgment for fines and fees against this owner, but all they can do is attach it as a lien against the property. And so now the city's gone through the full cycle of traditional code enforcement, and the property is not into compliance, which is the goal so many of you mentioned. And then what usually happens next? Another complaint. This time it looks like it might be from a city council member. And so the cycle is going to continue. Inspectors go out, warning citations, court actions, another lien. It just keeps going and going. And we've heard from cities that this can go on for years. And where does it get you in the end? Is the property in any better shape? No, it's often in any worse shape. The grass is growing, someone has dumped tires on the property. And what's more, these liens can actually make the property less attractive to prospective purchasers who might buy it and actually fix it up, and it might deter them. And so why is this a problem? I'm sure all of you, many of you might be seeing this in the community. It's not effective. The property is actually worse off than it was before. It's not efficient. Each of these icons really represents a lot of inspector time, legal time, a lot of time and money that your city's putting in to try to get them up to code. And it's not equitable. Because of decades of racist policies and procedures, policies and practices, properties like this can be disproportionately located in communities of color. And if your code enforcement process isn't reducing the harms caused by these properties, it's resulting in inequitable outcomes. Traditional code enforcement can also have inequitable outcome for tenants because they're unlikely to complain about conditions because of their unequal bargaining power, and on low-income homeowners who simply might not have the resources or ability to make repairs, and fines and fees are only going to make it less likely that they're able to repair their home. And so what's an alternative? What's a better approach? What we like to talk about, what we outline in the publication, is something we're calling strategic code compliance. And so this is an approach that's really, rather than being reactive, is really proactive and sees code enforcement as part of a broader strategy to improve the health and safety of your community and reach your neighborhood stabilization goals. And it uses a broader tool set than just the traditional code enforcement tools of civil and criminal enforcement, which can work for some properties, especially those in stable markets or owners with resources, but are less likely to work in communities with high vacancy rates and weak markets. So a broader set of tools and really holding equity as a key goal of the code enforcement process. And then in the publication, we outline 6 strategies that we've seen communities that are making this shift from traditional code enforcement to strategic code of compliance. We outline 6 strategies that we've seen communities use to help them make that shift. So the first is really using data to inform the code enforcement strategies and allocate limited resources. So looking at where's traditional code enforcement working and where is it not? What properties are using data to understand what properties are causing the most harm and where there's the most chance for code enforcement to help move the market or improve neighborhood conditions. Second, and this one is really key, to move towards strategic code compliance, creating different strategies for different property types. As I said, a warning and a citation might work for some owners, but it's probably what we've seen not going to work for a long-time vacant and abandoned property, or landlord or certain recalcitrant landlords. So really thinking about your owner, market, and property type and creating different buckets of strategies to address those different property types. Third, using data again to really track and evaluate your outcomes. So we encourage cities to be innovating, trying new things, as our friends in Peoria say, stealing ideas from other cities. Really go out there and take ideas, but then testing them out and making sure there's not unintended consequences and that it's really helping you achieve your goals. Fourth, collaborating among departments, both internally. That could be with the health department, land banks, other levels of government, and externally with social service agencies, nonprofits, legal aid organizations, hoarding task force, to really bring to bear a full suite of resources and expertise that's going to be needed to get properties up to compliance given the different situations. Fifth, thinking about making broader changes within the department and within the city to create a culture of compliance. And so this can be big things, like we've seen some cities change the name of their department from code enforcement to code compliance to highlight that. It could be seemingly superficial things like having code inspectors wear khakis and a polo rather than a law enforcement outfit or uniform. And doing more community outreach events and changing hiring and training practices. Finally, making equity a core principle and a desired outcome of the program. Really looking at past practices and understanding what consequences they're having, and thinking about how the process can be used going forward to remedy inequalities, whether they're racial or otherwise in your community. So now we want to dive in to some of the specific strategies that we talk about for each of the common problem property types. So for vacant properties, in the publication in each chapter for these 3 property types, we outline a core policy. So for vacant properties, our core policy is fix it up, pay it up, give it up. And this is really the idea that owners of these deteriorating vacant and abandoned properties should have an opportunity to fix it up, send clear warnings, give them time, ask them to reduce the harm that it's causing to neighbors and neighborhoods. But if they refuse to, then the city needs to step in, do abatement work, board windows, as we said, reducing the harm the property is causing. Once the city does that, it's important for them to try to collect those costs of abatement. And so doing that by placing a priority lien on the property and then asking the owner to pay. So that's the pay it up. So if the owner's not going to fix the problems themselves, at least pay for the public costs of having to reduce the harm caused by the property. And then third, if the owner, as a last resort, if they're not willing to fix it up, if they're not willing to pay up, it's time for them to give it up. And this is where the city would use that priority lien to force the transfer of the property, to move it to a new, more responsible owner. And I want to say, and we go into this in detail in the report, that what this process would look like in your individual city and whether you can even implement this type of process is going to depend a lot on state law. State law, as many of you know, governs, what type of abatement action you can take, what types of fees you can collect, and whether they can be added to the taxes or as a priority lien, and what that foreclosure or transfer process.
Hey, Libby, we lost you there for a second.
Oh, no. What did I say?
You were talking about how the state laws could spell out what is and not possible, but I think we got the gist of it. Maybe to jump through.
Oh, I said.
Good now.
Yeah, I said talk to your local legal minds about that. Great. Thanks, Tarek. Okay, great. So now going back to our example of this house outside of Pittsburgh, what does fix it up, pay it up would look like for this house? So here we are with the tires and the long grass, giving the owner an opportunity to fix things up. They have not responded. The city needs to step in, haul those tires away, cut that grass, and then place a priority lien against the property. There's the pay it up. If the owner's not going to fix it, then it's time to take them to court, transfer to a new, more responsible owner. And a lot of times this is where land banks come in. So what happened to this property? looking great. So in real life, the local government did do a foreclosure action, and the property was transferred to a land bank that could serve as a temporary public steward, clear out all of those back liens, clear the title to the property. And the land bank sold this property to a local developer who did the rehab work and then sold the property to a first-time home buyer. And that was part of the agreement, that it would be sold to a first-time home buyer. And so, oh no, these folks are back. What are they complaining about now? They're saying, wow, great job. So again, this isn't, I can't say this is going to be a magic wand that is going to do this for every vacant abandoned property in your community, but it is an approach that many communities have found to be successful, and a much better approach than spinning their wheels, especially on these kinds of vacant abandoned properties where the owners are non-responsive. So before I turn it over to Erica, I want to touch briefly on, what does strategic code compliance look like for rental properties? And here, the core policy I'm going to talk about rentals and then owner occupants. So here, the core policy that we talk about is really proactive rental inspection and licensing programs. And like I said, the key area where traditional code enforcement falls short for tenants is really it being so complaint based, because tenants are just, many are just not willing to call in to report the bad conditions because
Sorry for the technical difficulty, folks. Hopefully we'll get Libby back here in a second.
Okay, I'm back. Okay.
Okay. Tenants don't want to report bad conditions because they fear retaliation, or even displacement.
Yep. That's great. And so the key kind of pieces of that are, knowing your rental inventory, creating a proactive rental and licensing program, but, really designing effective incentives to encourage landlords to take part, and enforcement mechanisms, which we outline. And finally, protecting tenants because we know that increased enforcement might result in properties being condemned or retaliation against landlords. So making that a key part of the program. And finally, owner-occupied properties, touching on strategies. The core policy here is what we like to call equitable off-ramp. So if you picture the traditional code enforcement approach, and you have a low-income homeowner, they're on the path to facing civil or criminal penalties, you want to encourage, build in as many off-ramps as possible throughout the whole process to divert them, to help them bring the property up to code and avoid those civil and criminal penalties. So this is what we call equitable off-ramps. And these might include, preventative things like repair funding and resources. In the publication, we have an appendix that highlights some key innovative repair programs across the country. This is sending reminders and warnings, providing resources, code inspectors that can help work with low-income homeowners, or other resources. And if an owner is willing to bring the property up to code quickly, programs that provide waivers of liens or penalties if they get it up to code. Well, thank you. Apologies for the technical difficulties, but I encourage you to download the publication and dig into it more. And now I'm going to turn things over to Erica, who can talk a bit, provide an example of these policies in action.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you for everyone here today. I'm really excited to share with you a case out of Cincinnati. I have support in the background, so I'll go ahead and ask. Let's flip to the next slide, and we'll talk through a property here in the city of Cincinnati, 1833 Sycamore. This is an anchor property. As you can see here in this image, it is a flat iron building. And it is in a neighborhood, Mount Auburn, which is one of our 7 hills in the city of 7 Hills. So why that's important is that, as you can see here, there is some decline, but right off the edge of that photo, there's a pretty steep grade. And that will come into play about the impact on the city in dealing with this structure. So this is an anchor property for the business district. And when I started here in the city in 2015, that business district was completely empty and vacant, including this property. And the historic structure is what you see in the forefront. There is an addition we'll talk about, which is the white box. I'll also note that while the structure is historic, this image is in fact from the classic 1990s rollerblading film Airborne, starring a very young Jack Black, which only adds to the historic nature of the structure. Next slide. So this was what it looked like on the inside. Through the 1990s, the property had been a productive rental property with a few units in the historic Flatiron, with more units in the addition, and that is this very attractive white box that you see here in the bottom left-hand corner. This likely would not have been built under our current historic guidelines. So fast forward from the 90s, where it was productive rental property, in the 2000s, things started to deteriorate, particularly at the white box addition, and the owner divested, sold to an LLC, and that LLC from the mid-2000s all the way up to when the city of Cincinnati intervened, did nothing with the historic structure or the white box. So what you see here in the upper left-hand corner, that is indeed a massive hole in the roof, and that hole allowed, in addition to fun little critters, the weather to just pour into the historic structure for well over a decade. There was, of course, an attempt made. Next slide. And this is where we started to get into our traditional code enforcement process. And thank you again to folks who could forward to the next slide here. One slide back. Spoiler alert, we'll get there in a second. So we did exactly what the example Libby pointed out did. We sent notices. We said, this is dangerous. You need to fix it up. We sent civil citations. You need to pay us. You have not paid us. The city spent its own money repeatedly barricading the property from human trespassers. We did not barricade, though there were raccoon trespassers as well. But the city eventually had to really dig deep on the addition and demolish because, again, as I stated, it was on a significant grade and it was in danger of collapsing into the right-of-way and impacting both city infrastructure and neighboring properties. That demolition was 6 figures, likely due not only to the grading and hillside stabilization efforts, but also to asbestos remediation. So all the meanwhile, we were getting pretty much a thumbs down from the community. They were not impressed with where our traditional efforts had gotten them. All they had was a hole in the ground and no plan in sight for any real change at the property. But then after the foreclosure crisis, after realizing we can't just keep this cycle of inspection and fine and enforcement going, we started to think a little bit differently. And fast forward, next slide, this is where we ended up. So I'll talk about how we got from the hole in the roof, the angry community, to this beautiful outcome. The law department for the city of Cincinnati started to engage with the community. In particular, we met with the president of the community council, who is a very strong advocate for her neighborhood, a neighborhood that was racially diverse, that has a lot of medical facilities in the area, but had, again, no business district. In this building, she identified as the anchor. If we could turn this, we could turn the rest of the business district. So as we're talking with her, we got support from the city administration. We advanced forward with a lawsuit seeking to have a receiver put in place. The goal being the receiver would be able to make some initial repairs, some basic stabilization, and then hopefully get it into the hands of a solid developer. As I mentioned, we had over $100,000 in demolition costs. We had a barricade cost. We had citations. We also filed monetary claims against the property owner through our litigation, and we obtained a large money judgment. But around this time, we started engaging more deeply with our local land bank in Hamilton County, and there became a really nice synchronicity around the community, the land bank, and the city wanting to test this tool that exists in the state of Ohio, whereby cities can use their local land banks as an agent to stabilize a property. The city and the land bank were interested in saving this building and putting some real money into it. So rather than pursue the lawsuit, we pivoted. And I think for any lawyers on this call, that's an important note, is always to bring some humility to your lawsuits, because the outcome that you're looking for can be achieved in a variety of ways, not just through a court order. Using this tool that we have in Ohio, which is just the revised code 715.26 and 0.261, we took our judgment and assigned it to the land bank. We entered into an agreement with the land bank to stabilize the structure. And by the time we had gotten that far, we had already gone through the conversation with the owner of, well, you're not going to fix it up. You've proven you're incapable of paying it up. So by using these tools, we really did put them in the posture of they had to give it up. And next slide, please. This is a picture on the left of what one of the rental units in the property looked like during stabilization after some initial clean out. And then on the right, fast forward about 3 years, including delays related to COVID, you had, for the first time in 2.5 decades, occupied rental property in this gorgeous Flatiron building. I also want to, next slide, please, call out that they included this Flatiron Cafe. It's a bar, it's a cafe for coffee. They have small bites. They utilize the landscape so that they have this porch outside where they've got great vantage points of the city because of the hillside. And they also, rather than whiteboarding over or covering up, they called out the historic features. And on the left-hand side of the picture of the bar, you'll see there's some stacked stone that you can enjoy your cup of coffee right next to it. This is one of those examples of when you start thinking a little bit differently, how you can shake loose, not only get compliance, but really make an impact in a community, in the area surrounding the Flatiron. We now have buildings that are going up. We have condos. We have affordable housing complexes being built. And I firmly believe this really helped get us over that barrier with this community. So with that, thank you again. And I'll turn it back to Tarek to talk through some of the opportunities for local governments and others.
Hello, there's the camera. Thanks, Erica. Some good questions on the right. So feel free to jump in some more. We'll have some time to address them. Also, a lot of conversations about, the fundamental underlying dynamic here is the market economics. So really good conversation on the right, and certainly our publication acknowledges that as a real challenge that is difficult to address, from vacancy, disinvestment, to speculation, to gentrification. So I wanted to just very quickly take a few minutes. Today, we're not only releasing our publication, but we're also announcing a new round of competitive technical assistance scholarships. These are scholarships that we have used in the past to really pilot new approaches. When we're trying to push the field, we're looking for partners that are willing to be brave and kind of get in the sandbox with us and experiment. And with a rash of incredible ideas from other communities that have started to make this shift, we're hoping then that kind of inspires folks to think about replication, or how you customize some of these ideas for your own community and within the confines of your state's regulatory framework. So We will be offering a limited number of scholarships. Each one provides approximately 200 hours of customized technical assistance from a team here at Community Progress. Now, the value is about $50,000. The scholarship will fully underwrite these costs. In prior scholarship programs, we've asked communities to put a little skin in the game. So we're trying something different here. There'll be no cash contribution. That means, obviously, that this will probably be more competitive. But we also will want to make sure that we're really working with compelling projects and some great folks that are committed to kind of breaking free from the status quo and experimenting. So who are the eligible applicants? It is limited to local governments that serve jurisdictions with populations between 25,000 and 500,000. We picked some of those population thresholds just because obviously we work a lot in some rural communities, but we do want to make sure there's some capacity there to utilize these scholarships to kind of develop these innovations that can then inform the national field. And we feel that a lot of those communities over 500,000 probably have the resources that should they want to seek our assistance, happy to work with them. But we do encourage local governments, work with your community partners, right? We want to make sure, and you'll see in the application process, the scoring criteria, some of that is, your willingness to center those residents most impacted by vacant, abandoned, deteriorated properties in your projects. Very quickly, the timeline, they will be reviewed starting April 1st, and then an ongoing rolling basis after that. We will continue to review until the program is closed at May 31st, or when scholarship funding has been exhausted, whichever is sooner. And then we will have until the end of the year to work on these scholarship projects. So the online application, I think one of our colleagues will post it, already has learned about the scholarship program. And there is the online application. We intentionally kept this very short. This first application explains the selection process then, in which we'll have an hour call with compelling proposals, and then maybe even request some additional materials as this moves down the process towards final selection. The scoring criteria, as we say, obviously this has to be related to vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties, right? So those communities that have a demonstrated need in addressing vacancy will be prioritized. Where there is evidence of neighborhood disparities and inequities, those communities will be prioritized. A demonstrated commitment to improving policies and practices. Is there a culture of reform and taking chances in a local government that would show promise for success for this project? And a level of likelihood of project success. If not, it's what can we learn? Very important insights that, again, they can inform the national field of practice. So next steps, Libby, do you want to jump back and close us out and then lead the Q&A? Oh, you're still muted.
Thanks. Next step. So first, of course, download the publication, check it out. Let us know what you think. Please reach out if you have any questions or feedback or other great examples we can highlight in other ways. We would really love to hear from you and look forward to having everyone engage with the publication. Review the scholarship materials and apply if you are interested. We'd love to work with more communities. And then also, I want to put a plug in for our Reclaiming Vacant Properties Conference. We're looking, it's coming up in October in St. Louis. And this is a great time to learn more about code enforcement and all the systems that go into addressing vacant property and hearing great ideas from across the country. And right now, we're also looking for proposals. So if there's something great work that you're doing that you'd love to highlight, or with yourself or with some other communities, we'd love to have you put in a proposal for a session now. So you can check those out on our website. And I think that we're also going to put in the links to those in the chat. So now wanted to get started with some of the great questions that came in and discussion. I'm going to can we add Erica? I wanted to start with this one that came in from Kirby about corporate landlords.
Yes, so I'm happy to weigh in, and this is also probably an offline conversation. I will share The city of Cincinnati has been quite aggressive in filing some lawsuits. At the heart of those were efforts to bring those out of town property owners to the table because they own quite a lot of properties. And we are currently now facing counterclaims as a result of some of that work. So I'm a little reluctant to go really deep into strategy here, but it comes down to, depending on how big your entity is, check your code language. We find some real success, even if you simply add in that obligations go with a person in control. That means you can start to not just think about the owner. We have language that allows us to go after property managers, even statutory agents. So it's bringing the right people to the table. And I think a lot of jurisdictions are limited or hand-tied by going after only the owner of the property.
That's right. Thanks, Erica. And I think this is a question that we're getting from cities across the country with these corporate landlords coming in and having an increasing presence in single family properties. And, as Erica has said in other presentations, code enforcement is just key in really being aggressive, against these owners and holding them to a standard. And I think code enforcement is really important in a couple of ways. One, using it to ensure that they're maintaining these properties up to code, but also when you're thinking about your community's property tax foreclosure system, that is where many of these investors are getting these properties. And so if you're making sure that all of your public costs of abatement and handling, vacant abandoned properties are on the tax rolls so that the minimum bids for those properties at the auction, reflect the true public costs, that might have an impact on reducing speculation, speculators or bad actors from coming in and buying the properties. So there's really, I think we haven't come up with a magic solution to this problem that we're hearing, but I think code enforcement does really play a key role. Let's see. The next question we wanted to field was about effective incentives for landlords. And in the publication, just wanted to highlight that we do include an appendix that highlights some really good grant and lending program, grant and loan programs for landlords across the country that connects that money with maintaining the property up to code going forward and affordability restrictions. So there's those kinds of incentives, like giving money and loans to help. Also, reducing fees, for landlords that are in compliance, or, perhaps other things that the city can offer, like preferential, sales of city-owned property or opportunities to have access to local government officials as part of those incentives. Erica, is there any incentives you all provide to landlords?
You're muted.
We would put some seed money in. Oh, I hope you've heard me. We were going to put some seed money in, and the hope is that we'll have a revolving loan fund available for the smaller scale landlords. Again, like if you're a city over 500 or if you're a landlord with over 50 units, we're not going to be able to subsidize you as easily, but we'll allow that money to also be built up by philanthropy. So the goal is to really grow that pot for where landlords want to, but have some financial restrictions to be able to get to compliance.
And I think both of those questions also speak to the core policy that we include in the publication, which is for occupied tenant or rental properties, rental housing. It really is proactive rental inspection and licensing program. And to kind of build in performance-based metrics into the program. So those landlords that are in compliance, that provide healthy and safe housing for those residents in your community, maybe you inspect them only once every 4 years. Whereas those who are constant problems and creating unsafe conditions for tenants, it's every year. So in that same performance base, it's what are the other incentives you can provide for landlords to really recognize that no matter in any community, landlords are going to have to play some part of your ecosystems towards providing safe and just housing for all.
Thank you. I wanted to field this other question asking about the time increments for the fix it up, pay it up, give it up approach, and wanted to use it as an opportunity to talk a second about, and maybe Tarek, you can touch more on the overall timeline, but in the publication we highlight, really for the fix it up, really getting the city out there quickly and having, ensuring that the city is able to quickly abate these harms. But for the pay it up and give it up, we really, just like we talked about the equitable off ramps with low income homeowners, you'd want to include equitable off ramps for low income owners of these properties, or properties where these are heirs properties, where, the descendants of the old owner that passed away are still trying to figure things out. So, moving this property forward towards a new responsible owner, but including those off ramps. So in the publication, we highlight some great examples where, as properties that are coming through the property tax foreclosure system or the code enforcement process, where they're noticed to be heirs properties, that cities have created partnerships with local legal aid organizations to help those owners probate the property. And provide other kind of social services assistance. Tarek, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's often, it's also about the violation itself, right? When I worked for the city of Binghamton here, we really had short time frames to address some pretty significant violations, whether that's, trash and debris that could lead to rodent infestation, some health issues. We pretty much, once you mailed it, allow for a few days of mail, and then it's 24, 48 hours. Obviously, as the problem is bigger, if you're in an area that you have to deal with winter and the inability to make some of those more substantive repairs, you have to be thoughtful in your approach. But again, that's why it's not a one size fits all. It's really allowing for some discretion. And as those violations really do present harms to the neighbors and neighborhoods, the intensity of that harm should be commensurate with the speed at which the government commits to fixing it and abating it.
Erica, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
I think Tarek said it exactly right, especially on the fix it up. In terms of the pay it up, we file as quickly as we can. I do think that litigation takes its own path. I would always bet on, for a lawsuit, 6 to 18 months. I'm in lawsuits that have been going on for 6 years. So those are really dependent, but it takes commitment also to get people to that give it up stage. And that means everyone has to be in line and doing it consistently.
That's a great point. And that's within the local government, you mean. That is what we've seen, in city after city, that implementing this approach really involves code enforcement to talk to legal, to talk to the tax assessor often. And these are folks that sometimes don't talk regularly. So really learning together. And if you are considering applying for the scholarship, it's a great opportunity to bring those groups of people together to think through this and how it might work. And one more thing to add on the timeline is that it's really going to depend on your state processes. We're just talking to one state where the property tax foreclosure system takes 6 years. And that's just not going to be a good way to move that property to responsible ownership. So we've seen states come in and create optional, shorter processes for vacant and abandoned properties, or for any properties, so that you could start moving certain properties through more quickly. And as someone mentioned in the chat, ensuring that these are in rem processes so that it's against the property, so you're not having to go try to personally serve an LLC in California if you're in Ohio. So that these are in rem processes against the property, and that hopefully can move it, and you can get good title at the end as well. Well, wonderful. I think that we'll wrap it up here, but thank you all so much for joining us. Please be sure to download the publication, check out the scholarship materials, think about RVP, and I want to turn it back over to Julia to close us out. Oh, you're on mute, Julia. There you go.
The great closing. Thank you all for coming today. We have a survey for you to talk about your experience and give any feedback in the chat right now that's pinned. So please take a second to fill that out. And we'll be sending up a follow-up email in the next week or so with a recording and presentation slides and all of the resources that we shared. Thanks so much for joining us today.